At a luxury singles mixer inside a Charlotte hotel, a black man in his 30s was paired with a woman almost 10 years older than him, and the room noticed instantly. Not because they saw a romance, because they smelled a joke. When the men at the bar started laughing under their breath, he stood up, and everyone assumed he was about to walk out. Instead, he dragged his chair to her side of the table, sat down facing the bar, and what happened in the next 10 seconds changed both their lives. Why would a man throw away an easy exit to sit beside the one woman the whole room had decided to laugh at, and what did he understand that none of them did? Before we begin, drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. The hotel ballroom had been styled to resemble a magazine spread. Amber sconces along the walls, low jazz threading through unseen speakers, round tables draped in cream linen. A small camera crew worked the corners, 2 operators in black shirts pretending to blend in. None of it had the warmth it was trying to perform. It looked, more than anything, like a stage that had been told to act casual. David Hill arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. He stood inside the entrance for almost a full minute before anyone noticed him, taking the room in the way he took in unfinished blueprints at the firm, scanning for what was load-bearing and what was decoration. Most of it, he decided, was decoration. The men were laughing too quickly. The women were standing the way people stand when they know they are being watched. He had not wanted to come. His sister Vanessa had said the words that finally moved him on a Tuesday night in his kitchen. Leaning against the counter with her arms folded, while she watched him reheat the same plate of food twice because he kept forgetting to eat it. She told him that if he kept turning down every invitation, one morning he would wake up and discover he had forgotten how to talk to a woman who was not on a payroll or in a courtroom. He had not laughed at the line, that was how he knew it had landed. So he was here in a grey button-down she had picked out for him, intending to stay 1 hour and leave. He was not looking when Diane Whittaker walked in. She had arrived 5 minutes before him, through a different door, and by the time he registered her, she was already standing near the side exit, half turned toward it, checking her phone with the practiced calm of a woman who had decided in advance she would not be staying long. She did not look like the room. The other women had been arranged for the evening. She had simply walked in. Her dress was a deep, unflashy navy. Her hair was pinned up in a way that suggested she had done it herself in a hurry and had not bothered to check it twice. She was 45. And she carried it the way a person carries a key, without explanation, without apology, simply because it was hers. David looked at her once and thought, she's the only real person in this room. Then he looked away because women like that did not, in his experience, end up at his table. He found his assigned seat near the center of the room, ordered a sparkling water and waited. Diane had agreed to come because of Renee. Renee Marsh was the closest thing Diane had to a sister in Charlotte, an art critic who reviewed for 2 regional magazines and 1 online publication nobody read but everyone in the city pretended to. Renee was the kind of woman who said cruel things gently and gentle things cruelly, and she had been the one to physically pull Diane out of her gallery that evening, declaring that the smell of varnish was beginning to settle into her clothes in a way that was no longer charming. "You're going," Renee had said, holding the gallery door open. 1 hour. If it's awful, you walk, but you're going." Diane had gone. She had even brushed her hair. She was now standing near the exit, because the part of her that had walked through the door was already preparing the part of her that would walk back out. The host, a woman in a champagne-colored blazer named Brooke, took the small platform at the front and tapped a microphone twice. "All right, everyone. Time for our chemistry round." A murmur moved through the room. David felt his shoulders drop half an inch, not in relief, but in resignation. He had read the schedule. He knew what came next. "For this round," Brooke said, smiling at the camera before she smiled at the room, "we've paired you intuitively. No questionnaires, no algorithms. Just a feel for who might surprise each other." David did not believe her. The pairings had been decided by whoever was filming, for whoever would be watching the footage later. He had seen enough construction sites to know when a thing had been built for the photograph rather than the use. Brooke began calling names. The pairs stood, found their tables, performed the small awkward laugh the cameras wanted. The room rearranged itself like a deck being shuffled by someone who already knew the trick. "David Hill," Brooke said. "And Diane Whittaker." He stood up. He saw Diane move from the exit a moment later, slowly. The way a person walks when she has decided not to give anyone the pleasure of watching her hurry. David reached the small 2-seater first. He pulled out her chair because he had been raised to, and because it was the simplest small kindness available. She gave him a small nod that was not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement, and sat down. That was when the laugh started. It was small. It was meant to be small. A short, choked sound from a clutch of 3 men leaning against the marble bar. Late 20s, well-dressed, the kind of grooming that takes confidence in the mirror and confidence in the wallet. The center one had gel in his hair and a navy blazer that fit him too well. He leaned toward his friend, his voice lowered the way a stage whisper is lowered, which is to say it was meant to travel. Damn, they really matched him with somebody's auntie. The friend laughed, not loudly. Loudly was not the point. The point was the small, contained sound of a joke that wanted to be heard by exactly the right number of people. Diane heard it. She did not lift her head. She did not change her expression. The only thing that moved was her hand, which tightened a fraction on the cloth napkin in her lap. She had heard worse in worse rooms from men who had rehearsed less. She catalogued the remark, set it on the small internal shelf where she kept the others, and turned her attention to the menu with the same composure she used to greet difficult collectors at the gallery. David heard it too. He did not move at first. He picked up his water. He took a sip he did not want. Inside his chest something began to warm. Not the bright, clean flare of anger, but something duller and older. The feeling he knew from too many tables and too many rooms. The feeling of having heard something and having decided, almost without deciding, to let it pass. He had let it pass thousands of times. It was a muscle he had developed early. A memory came up, unwelcome and exact. 3 years earlier, a backyard cookout at his ex-wife's cousin's place. His ex-wife had walked over to the dessert table, and a distant relative, an older man, the kind who collected rooms full of his own laughter, had said something about how marriage agreed with her appetite. He had said it with a grin. 2 other men had grinned along. David had been standing 5 feet away, holding a paper plate, and he had said nothing. He had laughed a thin, polite laugh, because in that moment, laughing had felt like the easier shape to make with his face. His wife had not mentioned it on the drive home. She had not mentioned it ever. But she had looked out the passenger window the entire ride, and for 7 days afterward she had touched him only when he initiated it, and even then only briefly. That cookout was not the reason their marriage ended. But it was one of a long series of small evenings in which David had sat in the safe seat and watched someone else absorb the blow alone. He set the water glass down. He did not announce the decision to himself. He simply stood up. A small ripple moved through the nearest tables. The cameras in the corners shifted. Diane lifted her eyes from the menu and looked up at him. Her expression was unreadable. He understood in that flicker of a glance that she expected him to leave, that she had arranged her face for it already, that she had been left at tables before by men less interesting than him in rooms less expensive than this one. He did not leave. He took hold of his chair, lifted it clear of the table, and carried it the short distance to her side. He set it down beside hers, angled outward, and sat. He was now seated next to her, both of them facing the bar. The bar saw him, the 3 men saw him. The one with the gel in his hair stopped mid-sip. David took a breath and held it a second longer than was comfortable, because he wanted whatever came out of his mouth next to be true and not loud. He had spent enough of his life saying the wrong thing loudly. Tonight he wanted to say the right thing once. "You'll want to say something," he said. His voice did not carry the way an angry voice carries, but it carried. "Say it where I can hear it. Whispering doesn't make it less ugly. It just makes you smaller." The last word came out a touch unsteady. Not from fear, but from disuse. He had not said anything like this out loud in a long, long time. The bar did not answer. The man in the navy blazer set his drink down on the marble. He looked at his friends, and his friends looked at the floor, and none of them produced a single thing that could be called a comeback. Brooke, still at the platform, found the wisdom to call the next pair a little louder than the last. The cameras kept rolling. The jazz kept playing. Diane did not look at David right away. She looked down at the napkin in her lap and at her own hand on it. Her fingers had relaxed. She had not noticed them doing so. When she did look up, she did not look at the bar, and she did not thank him. Thanking him would have been the wrong shape for the moment, and she had not survived this long by giving men the wrong shape on demand. She looked at him directly in profile, because he was still facing the bar, and she asked him a question no one else in the room would have asked. "You okay?" David turned his head toward her. The warmth in his chest had shifted, become something more specific. He looked at her. Really looked, not the half-glance from the entrance, and he saw very clearly that she was asking because she meant it, that she was not asking the hero of the moment. She was asking the man. He did not answer right away. The honest answer was complicated, and he was not going to lie to her in the first 3 minutes. "Working on it," he said. She gave the smallest nod he had ever received from another adult human being. It was not approval, it was not romance, it was something quieter than either, and rarer. The mixer ended for them at 10 o'clock, when David turned to Diane and asked quietly whether she would like to leave. She said yes before he had finished the question. They walked out through the lobby together. The cameras did not follow. Outside, the night air was cool for late September, the kind of cool that makes a city feel cleaner than it is. "There's a place in Southend," Diane said. "Quita. They make a decent old-fashioned, and they don't play music loud enough to apologize for itself." Lead the way. She drove. He followed in his own car. He had not asked where they were going, and she had not offered. It was the first small contract between them. Trust me enough to follow, not enough to demand the address in advance. The bar she had chosen was tucked into the ground floor of a converted warehouse. Exposed brick, low pendant lights, 6 booths along one wall, half full on a Thursday. They took the booth at the back. She ordered an old-fashioned. He ordered a club soda with lime because he had driven and because he wanted to remember this conversation cleanly. She let him sit for a full minute before she said anything that mattered. Then she said it. What you did back there doesn't make you a hero. David did not flinch. He had been waiting for it in some shape. He set down his glass. I know. I've watched men do versions of that for 20 years, Diane said. Most of the time, what they're actually doing is auditioning. They want me to know they're not like the others. They want a thank you. Some of them want more than a thank you. That tracks. You did it cleaner than most, I'll give you that. She looked at him over the rim of her glass. But I've also watched men be very kind on a Friday and send a text 3 days later asking if I'd like to do something low-key. Low-key being the magic word. Low-key meaning he doesn't want to be seen with me in daylight. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction. Not a smile, acknowledgement. I'm not going to argue with any of that, he said. You're right. The kind of man who pulls a chair next to a woman in front of a room and then disappears is a real category of man. I've met him too. I've worked next to him. So why aren't you him? He took his time. He could feel her watching him think. He understood that the wrong answer here, too clean, too prepared, would close the booth. I don't know that I'm not, he said finally. I can tell you what I did, and I can tell you why I think I did it. I can't tell you what I'll do on a Tuesday 3 weeks from now. I'd be lying if I said I could. She studied him for a long beat. Whatever she had been preparing to say next, she did not say it. She took a sip of her drink instead. That's the most honest thing a man has said to me in this town in 2 years. I'm not trying to be charming, I noticed. It was almost a compliment. Almost. He let her have the silence for a moment. Then he asked her, because he wanted to know more than he wanted to defend himself. What kind of gallery she ran, she told him. She talked about the space in Plaza Midwood, the fact that she had paid the first 6 months of rent out of her own savings after the divorce. The way she had built her roster around women over 40 whose careers the major galleries had dropped or never picked up. She told him about a painter from Greensboro who had not sold a piece in 9 years until Diane gave her a solo show last spring. She talked about the smell of varnish in the back room, and how Renee said it was beginning to live in her clothes. She talked about the way collectors spoke to her differently after she turned 40 than they had at 35. Not worse, exactly, but with a different vocabulary, as if she had stepped sideways into a category they no longer had to court. He listened the way an architect listens, not nodding too quickly, looking at the room she was building with her words, and walking through it before he answered. After her second drink, she told him about the marriage. About Daniel, a private collector with old family money and a second house in the mountains. He had liked her in the beginning in a particular way, as a discovery. He had liked introducing her to his circle as the woman who had taught him about contemporary work, and then slowly, as a woman who was cute but small. She used those exact words, cute, small. He said it like an endearment. The first time he said it, I laughed. The 40th time I had stopped noticing it. By the time we divorced, I genuinely believed it. I had to spend 2 years unbelieving it. That's a long time to spend rebuilding a sentence about yourself. It's the only sentence that matters, he said. He gave her something back because the booth required it. He told her about his own divorce, kept short. 2 people who had loved each other once and had run out of language for each other in roughly the 7th year. No villains. He talked about the strange acoustic of an apartment built for 2 people and now occupied by 1. He talked about the fact that he had not dated in almost 3 years, not because he was carrying a torch, but because he had not been able to imagine a conversation that would not feel like paperwork. He talked about being a black man in rooms designed by white men. He told her about a meeting earlier that summer in which a senior partner had complimented him on being articulate, and how he had nodded and said thank you and gone home and stared at the bathroom mirror for 10 minutes afterward, not in anger, but in a very tired kind of recognition. He kept some things back, the parts of his private life he did not yet have words for. It was not secrecy. It was triage. Diane did not push for more than he gave. She seemed to understand the geometry of what was being shared and what was not without needing it explained. It was somewhere near the end of the night that her phone rang, once, then a text, then another, then a third in quick succession. She glanced down and her face changed. What? David said. Renee. She read for a moment, her thumb moving down the screen. The pendant light caught the side of her face, and David watched her expression close, layer by layer, like a building going dark floor by floor at the end of a working day. She turned the phone toward him. It was a video, 43 seconds long. The angle was from the bar. Somebody at that marble counter had filmed it and posted it online, probably the friend of the man in the navy blazer, probably without thinking. The clip opened on Diane at the small two-seater, then David standing, then David lifting his chair, then his face as he said the line. The audio was clean enough that the line was clearly audible. The caption read, "They paired the black guy with the oldest woman in the room. Watch what he does." The counter, when Diane refreshed it, said 210,000 people had watched it. David did not say anything for a moment. "It's been 3 hours," Diane said. "The replies are open. Don't read them. I already am." He did not stop her. He understood that telling her not to look at something written about her body and her age would be its small insult. She read for maybe 90 seconds. Her face did not change much, but her shoulders did. They settled into the position he recognized from the first moment he had seen her near the side exit of the ballroom. The position of a woman who had decided in advance not to be surprised by the world. She set the phone face down on the table. "One of them called me ma'am," she said, with the kind of punctuation that turns ma'am into a slur. "The most liked one says I must be thanking my lucky stars. Another says he deserves someone younger. They've already started an argument about me. I read too far, and now I know what some woman 2 states away thinks about my facial structure." He did not laugh, because it was not a joke, but he understood that she was making the small noises a person makes when she is trying not to be wounded in front of a witness. He let her make them. When she was finished, she looked up. "Listen to me. I am not going to be your viral moment. You're not. I don't want to be the older woman the kind young man rescued at a mixer. I don't want to be a lesson somebody learns about kindness on the internet. Understood? And I need you to understand something else." Her voice did not rise. It got quieter, which was worse. "I had a thought earlier tonight when you said what you said at the bar. For about half a second I thought about telling Renee, because Renee runs the gallery's page online, and there is a version of this story that would be very good for me, very good for the gallery. A perfect little post about dignity. I caught myself, but I had the thought." He looked at her steadily. "That doesn't make you bad, it makes me human, which is worse because I was about to lecture you on not making me a prop. You weren't going to do it, and I had a thought too. A different version. About how I was going to feel telling my sister about tonight, about how it was going to land for her. I caught it too, we both caught it. That's the only thing that matters." She studied him a long moment. "You're not a simple man. I'm trying not to be." She drank what was left in her glass and did not order another. They sat there in the back booth, and the world outside the window, a world that now contained 210,000 strangers with opinions about them, did not get smaller. But it stopped for the moment, being able to come inside. He drove home with the windows down. He did not call Vanessa. He did not check the video. He went to bed at 1 in the morning and did not sleep until almost 3. What kept him awake was not the clip. It was the fact that for the first time in 3 years he had told a stranger something true and watched her not flinch. The next 4 days happened in fragments. The video climbed. By Saturday morning it had crossed 800,000 and was spawning imitations, people making their own recordings in response. A dating writer wrote a long post about the anatomy of a real one. A men's life site ran a piece titled, "What the Charlotte Mixer Guy Got Right." Someone made a slowed-down clip of David's line and set it over a still of his face. Diane's phone, which had previously been a quiet device, became a problem. 2 of the gallery's longtime collectors wrote to her. The first said, "Good for you, honey," with a heart, in the tone a relative uses to congratulate a niece on a haircut. The second asked, very politely, whether Diane might be available for a profile in a regional lifestyle magazine, a piece, he said, about women living their best lives later in life. Diane wrote back to the second, "I'll pass, but thank you for thinking of me." She did not write back to the first. Renee called on Saturday afternoon. "We need to talk," Renee said. "Not yet." "When? When I know what I want to say." David's co-worker, a man named Greg who built models in the firm's basement and had never once asked David about his personal life, sent him the link with a laughing face and the message, "Bro, is this you?" David did not respond. Greg sent another 10 minutes later. "No disrespect, just surprised." David wrote back, "All good," then closed his laptop and went for a walk that lasted an hour. Vanessa called him on Saturday night. "I saw it. I figured. You okay? I keep getting asked that this week. Are you doing this because you mean it, or because you're tired of not doing things?" He let the question sit. "Both, probably." "That's a dangerous mix, David, I know. Don't break that woman. She doesn't deserve to be the place you finally start being brave." "I'm not going to break her. I'm asking you to be sure." He did not answer right away. He understood that Vanessa was not being unkind. She had been the one to push him out of the apartment in the first place, and now she was the one asking him to be careful with where he had landed. "I hear you," he said. He hung up and sat on his couch for 40 minutes without turning the television on. Diane texted him on Monday evening. "Come by the gallery after 7. I'll be the only one there," he went. The gallery occupied the bottom floor of a brick building in Plaza Midwood, with a single long window facing the street and a hand-lettered sign above the door that read simply, "Whitaker." He arrived at 7:15. The closed sign was already turned. He knocked. She let him in. The space was smaller than he had expected, and more careful. 8 pieces hung at varying heights, all by women whose names he did not recognize. The lighting was warm but not theatrical. There was a single wooden chair near the back and an old industrial table that served as a desk. The room smelled faintly of the varnish she had told him about. She did not offer him wine. She did not perform hostess. She simply walked him through it, told him who each artist was, where she had found the painter from Greensboro, what a sculptor in Durham had said the day she started making work again after 11 years of silence. She talked about the pieces with the specificity of a woman who had earned the right to talk about them, not as a curator selling, but as a person who had stood in the studio when the paint was still wet. He stopped in front of a piece in the middle of the long wall. A red and brown abstract, almost the size of a door, the brushwork thick in some places and nearly dry in others. It looked to him like a wound that had decided to become a window. "Why, this one," he said. She came and stood beside him. "Not close, close enough." "She painted it the year her mother died," Diane said. "She couldn't tell me what it meant for almost 6 months. Then one night she called me and said, I think I was trying to paint the inside of my own chest. I bought it the next morning." "Did you tell her that she got it right?" Diane looked at the painting, and her face did something small that he caught only because he was watching for it. "I didn't have to." She knew. He did not respond. He understood that anything he said in that moment would shrink the painting. He stood there with her, in front of a piece that had been made out of grief, and he understood for the first time very clearly that he had been allowed into a room very few people were allowed into. Not the gallery, the other room, the one behind it. The bell above the door rang. He had not known it had a bell. The figure who came through it did so with the easy confidence of a person who had a key, and Diane's small inhale told him before her face did. Renee Marsh, early 50s, taller than Diane by an inch, in a black coat and silver earrings that caught the gallery light. She had the look of a woman who had been beautiful for so long she had grown bored of being told so. She set her keys on the industrial table without asking. "Diane, hi Renee. I came to drop off the catalogue proofs. I didn't realize you had company." "You did realize, maybe a little." Renee turned a small smile on David. "Hi, I'm Renee. I've been hearing your voice on the internet for 4 days. David Hill." "I know." She walked into the space. She did not look at the paintings. She looked at him and at Diane and at the distance between them, and David watched her measure it. "How long are you staying?" she asked him. "As long as Diane wants me to." "Good answer." "Renee," Diane said. "I'm being polite." Renee turned back to David. "May I ask you something direct?" "Yes. Are you here because you see her, or because you like how good you look standing beside her?" The gallery went quiet in a particular way. Diane did not move. David understood in the half-second before he answered that this was the question Diane had not yet asked herself out loud. That Renee was asking it on her behalf, and that Diane was waiting, without permission, without coordination, simply waiting to hear what came out of his mouth. He gave the honest answer because he had given Diane an honest answer in the booth on Thursday, and he did not know how to start being dishonest now. "I'm not sure," he said. The 2 words landed in the room the way a glass lands when it slips. "I think I'm here because I see her. I believe that. But there's a video out there with almost 1 million people who've watched it, and I'd be lying if I told you I'd been able to keep that completely separate in my own head this week. I'd like to say I'm certain. I'm not. Not yet." Renee looked at him for a long moment. Her face did not change, which was worse than if it had. "That is a very honest answer," she said. "It's also the wrong one to give in this room tonight." She turned to Diane, her voice softening only by a fraction. "I'll go." "Yes," Diane said, "please." Renee picked up her keys, looked once more at David on her way out. Not unkind, only thorough, and let herself out into the street. The bell rang again behind her. Diane did not speak for a long time. David did not try to fill the silence. He had learned in 4 short days that filling silences with this woman was a way of making them larger. When she finally spoke, she did not look at him. "I don't think you should stay tonight." "Okay. I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. I just cannot be the question mark of a man who is still figuring out his own kindness. I have done that before. I came out of it the long way. I am too old to do it again. I understand. Do you?" "Yes." She turned and looked at him finally. Her eyes were dry. She was not performing anything. "Then go, please," he went. He stood for a moment on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, and watched through the long window as Diane turned the lock behind him and stood alone in the middle of her own gallery, looking at the red and brown painting on the long wall. He did not knock. He walked to his car. Inside, Diane sat down in the wooden chair near the back and looked at the painting for a long time. She did not cry. She'd stopped crying about men of any age several years earlier, and she was not about to break the streak tonight. What she felt instead was the quieter, harder thing she had hoped. Across the booth on Thursday, across this gallery floor an hour ago, she had quietly, almost without permission, allowed herself to hope. And then she had punished herself for the hoping. She thought about the small thought she had caught in herself at the bar, the one about Renee and the gallery's page. She thought about the version of herself that had wanted for half a second to use David the way she had been afraid David might use her. She was not cleaner than him. They were both standing under the same gaze, both trying not to flinch in it. She sat in the gallery until almost 4 in the morning. She turned off the lights at 12 minutes past 4 and locked the door. Outside, the street was empty, and the lamp at the corner of her block was the only thing in the world that seemed to know she was there. The week that followed did not feel like a week. It felt like a long Tuesday that did not end. David did not text. A message on day 1 would be reflex. A message on day 3 would be pressure. A message on day 5 would be paperwork. Diane did not text either. She opened the gallery at the regular times. Renee called once on Wednesday, and they talked for 40 minutes about a different artist pricing, and neither of them mentioned the man. The video began slowly to fall. On the 10th day, Vanessa called him. "You haven't done anything," she said. "Hello to you too. You haven't done anything for 10 days, David. And I want to know if you think that's the same thing as respect." "I think she asked me to leave. She asked you to leave that night. Not for a decade. You're calling silence a kindness, you always have. You called silence a kindness in your marriage too. And look how that ended." He felt the line lift in him and did not entirely keep it down. "You don't get to bring my marriage into this. I'm your sister. That's the only line I have." Her voice did not rise. "If you're staying away because you think it's what she asked for, you're wrong. She asked you to leave the room. She didn't ask you to disappear. There's a difference. And if you can't tell the difference, that's not respect. That's hiding." He hung up. He sat with the phone face down on his thigh for 15 minutes. He knew she was right inside the first 5. The other 10 were spent finding the part of himself that could call her back without performing the apology. When he did call, she answered immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know, I'm going to go. I know that too." He went 2 days later on a Wednesday afternoon because he wanted to come on a day that meant nothing. The trees in Plaza Midwood had begun to turn. 2 customers were inside, a woman in a long coat, a man in his 60s at the long wall. David stayed near the front and pretended to look at a black and white photograph on the short wall. He did not look at Diane. He felt her register him without turning her head. The customers took 20 minutes. When the second one was gone, Diane walked to the door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the small sign from open to closed. "You took your time," she said. "Vanessa called me." "That tracks. She told me I was confusing leaving the room with leaving. She's smarter than both of us." She walked back to the industrial table and rested both hands flat on its edge. "I want to ask you one question," she said. "And I want you to take as long as you need to answer it. I am not going to be charmed by speed." "Understood." She drew a small breath. Her voice was quieter than any voice he had heard from her so far. If there had been no room, no laugh at the bar, no video, no chance for any of this to look like anything from the outside, would you still have sat down beside me? He did not answer for a long time. He had known she would ask it in some form. The form she had chosen was cleaner than the one he had rehearsed against, which made it harder. He looked at her. He looked at the red and brown painting. He looked at his own hands briefly, because they were the only honest thing he was carrying. "I can't tell you what would have happened in a room that didn't exist," he said. "I'd be making it up. Anybody who tells you they can answer that question is lying to you or to themselves or both." "Okay, but I can tell you something I haven't told you. You walked into that ballroom 5 minutes before I did. By the time I noticed you, you were already standing near the side exit, half turned toward the door. I saw you for maybe 4 seconds before I sat down at my own table, and I had a thought. The thought was, she's the only real person in this room." He kept his eyes on her. "And then I sat down and forgot about you, not because you weren't striking. Because I have been a man who teaches himself not to look twice at women like you. I assumed somebody like you wouldn't be sitting at any table with me tonight. I'd done that math before I'd taken my first sip of water. Go on." When the host called my name and your name in the same breath, my first feeling was relief. 2 thoughts in this order. First, I get an hour with the only real person in the room. Second, she's going to walk over here and realize she got the short end. The man at the bar said what he said. I did what I did. I will not pretend it had nothing to do with the fact that you were the woman in front of me. Of course it did. But the part of me that stood up was not the part performing for the room. It was the part that had spent 4 seconds an hour earlier, looking at a woman across an exit door and thinking she was the only real thing in it. He stopped. "That's the answer. It's not certainty. It's what I have." The gallery was very quiet. There was no music, only the small hum of the lights and the occasional car outside. You couldn't have given me that on Monday night, Diane said. No, you needed the 10 days. I think so. So did I. She walked away from the table across her own floor and stopped about 3 feet from him. She did not touch him. I want to tell you something also, she said. I almost did it with Renee. Not the smaller thought I told you about at the bar. After you left on Monday, after I sat in here until 4 in the morning, I almost called her. I had the thought that I could control how the story got told if I let her shape it for me. If I was going to be looked at, I wanted to be the one who chose the angle. I caught myself, but it wasn't half a second, it was several minutes. That doesn't surprise me, you're not a simple woman either. I know that now. I'd rather be standing here with the harder version of you. Her face did something he could not name, not a smile, something further inside. Sit, she said. She picked up the wooden chair from the back, carried it to the middle of the floor, then pulled the chair from behind the industrial table and set it across from the wooden one. 2 chairs in the middle of the gallery, facing each other. They sat. They talked for 3 hours. It was not a romantic conversation. They negotiated, line by line, the shape of whatever this was going to be. No videos, no interviews, no profiles. If anyone asked, the answer was nothing at all. Not because they were embarrassed, because privacy was the only thing the internet could not take from them if they kept their hands closed around it. They talked about pace. Neither of them wanted to be in love by Christmas because somebody with a phone had decided they should be. When the clock said 10:20, Diane stood up. You should go home. I'd like to see you on Wednesday. Bring coffee. Don't bring flowers. Flowers are for people who are still trying to convince each other. Coffee, coffee. He went home and slept for 9 hours. Wednesdays became a thing. He brought coffee from a place she liked. By the 3rd Wednesday, she had started leaving a chair near the back specifically for him. They did not always talk. Sometimes she worked at the industrial table, and he sat with a book, and they shared the space the way people share a room they have agreed to share. She came to his firm in early November. He had told her the week before about a community church on the east side of the city he had been stuck on for a month. He could not get the morning light to land right in the main hall. She walked into his office, looked at the model for 3 minutes and said, Your problem isn't the windows, it's the floor. You're using a polished material, it'll throw the light back up at the ceiling. Use something matte. The light needs to land somewhere. He redid the drawings that night. The senior partner, the same one who had once complimented him on being articulate, looked at the new version and said, Whatever you did, keep doing it. David did not tell him what he had done. He told Diane, and she laughed in a way he had not heard from her before, low and brief. In early January, an art journalist from a national magazine called Renee. He had a theory that the woman from the now-buried video was a Charlotte gallery owner, and he wanted Renee on background to say what kind of person she was. Renee declined politely and firmly, and she did not call Diane afterward to inform her. She mentioned it 3 weeks later, almost in passing. Diane registered sitting in her own gallery on a Wednesday afternoon with David in the back chair that she had not felt grateful when Renee told her. She had felt something flatter, something like, of course Renee did that. That is what people who actually love you do. It was the first time in 3 years that she had received a kindness without being surprised by it. In late February they moved in together, not into his apartment, not into hers, but into a small 1-story house in Elizabeth, 4 blocks from the gallery, with a deep porch and a back room that took the morning light cleanly. They did not have a housewarming party. They had Vanessa and Renee over for dinner instead, the first time the 2 women had ever been in the same room. They were mirrors of each other in different finishes. Vanessa sharper at the edges, Renee softer, both the kind of woman who had spent a career being underestimated and had stopped pretending it didn't bore her. They did not become friends that night. But around the salad course, Renee said something dry about a piece of national news, and Vanessa laughed the kind of laugh she did not give away easily, and Renee looked across table at Diane with an expression that said, "Oh, I see, this one's allowed to stay." After both women had gone, Diane stood at the kitchen sink rinsing wine glasses. David came up behind her and rested his hands on the counter on either side of her, not touching her, only there. "They didn't kill each other," he said. Renee laughed twice. "That's a lot." He kissed the back of her neck. 2 years passed. The video was long gone from the internet's attention. The story the internet had wanted to tell about them had ended. The story they were actually living had only just begun, and it was by design not the kind of story a camera could see. Diane curated a final show at the original Whitaker Gallery before opening a second, larger space across town, not a replacement, but a parallel arm of the same project. The final show was a retrospective of 3 women painters whose careers she had been quietly building for a decade. Opening night was a Friday in late September. It rained lightly all afternoon and stopped at 6. By 8, the gallery was full. By 10, it was empty again, except for the catering staff stacking glasses and David standing in the middle of the floor in a black sweater she had bought him for his birthday. She walked the last of the catering staff out at 20 to 11 and locked the door behind them. The lights were still warm. The gallery looked, she realized, exactly the way it had looked the first night David had come into it, on a Monday in October 2 years before. He was standing in front of the red and brown painting, the same painting. It had not sold. She had decided, somewhere in the second month they were together, that she would not sell it. She walked to him. She did not say anything. He turned. He took something from his pocket, a small thin band of pale gold, no stone, no engraving. The kind of ring she would have chosen if she had been the one choosing. He did not kneel. That night, he said, they thought pairing me with you was the joke. They were wrong. Sitting down beside you was the first honest decision I had made in years. Everything real I have done since started there. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Yes, she said. There was no audience. There was no camera. There was no one to prove anything to. He slid the ring onto her finger. The fit was correct. I want to walk home, she said. Then we'll walk. The main strip was busy on a Friday night, and the side streets were quiet. They took the side streets. The lamp at the corner of her old block, the one that had been the only thing in the world that seemed to know she was there 2 years ago at 12 minutes past 4 in the morning, was on, doing its small and ordinary job of giving a quiet street a little light. She walked under it without looking up. People who like to find the lesson in things will tell you the test that night was the test of a man paired with an older woman in front of a room full of strangers. It was not the right test. The test that night had been for the room. For the 3 men at the marble bar, for the camera operators in the corners, for the hundreds of thousands of strangers who had watched the video and laughed. The test had been whether any of them was grown enough to understand that they were looking the wrong direction. The real story had never been the moment David stood up at the table. It had been every quieter moment afterward. The booth in Southend, the gallery at 12 past 4 in the morning, the apologized for phone call between a sister and a brother, the Wednesday afternoons with coffee, the mat floor in a church on the east side, the dinner where 2 careful women laughed twice, the small thin ring in an empty gallery on a Friday in September. Every one of those moments had happened with no one watching. Every one of them had been the same small decision made again. To sit beside her, not for the room. Most of the real stories in our lives are like that. They do not live in the loud moment the world wants to hand us. They live in the chairs we choose and the rooms we walk into and the small, unwatched decisions we make on ordinary Wednesdays that no one will ever ask us about. The bravest thing David Hill ever did was not standing up in a ballroom full of cameras. It was everything quiet he did afterward, when there was nothing left to prove and no one left to prove it to, and he chose her anyway.